Thank you for that opening prayer. So I'd like to get started, everyone. Good evening and welcome. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Muskoka McGregor. I am a member of the Whitefish River First Nation, and my role is First Nations Communications Coordinator. I'd like to thank everyone for logging on to participate in this Zoom meeting about the upcoming Anishinaabeg Nation Governance Agreement ratification vote here in Whitefish River First Nation. Just a couple housekeeping items before we get started here. I just ask that everybody please keep their mics on mute out of respect to our presenters. And also, if we can hold all of our questions and comments until the end of the presentation, as there is a time set aside for Q&As. I'd like to introduce our presenters tonight. We have Martin Bear, Governance Chief Negotiator in Anishinaabeg Nation. We have Pat Madabi, former Grand Chief and Champion, and Lisa Restool, Regional Communications Coordinator, Anishinaabeg Nation. And before we get started, I just want to clarify that we are on a timely schedule here, and I ask out of respect of our speakers that we stick to this time frame. Miigwech, I'd like to turn the mic over to Chief Shining Turtle in the Whitefish River First Nation boardroom. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Muskoka. So I want to welcome all of our friends, family, and citizens of Whitefish River to tonight's session on ANGA, the Anishinaabeg Nation Governance Agreement. This agreement identifies 4 key areas where we can exit the Indian Act and govern ourselves. So that's language and culture, citizenship, the elections, and management, which amounts to band support funding. This process we embarked on started in 1985 with the Chiefs and Councils of the Union of Ontario Indians, including Whitefish River, working to forge a brighter future for our people. Back then, the 40 bands were united in a common purpose: to make a difference at the local level, the band level. Today, ANGA, like other agreements, has caused some stiffening in our positioning. What we think will make a difference has changed somewhat over time, since 1995 to now. However, the spirit and substance of the original thinking remains true to this very day, and it's worth ratifying. It was Abraham Lincoln that said, "A house divided will not stand." This is a great and timeless truth, one that you have undoubtedly been aware of. And today, unfortunately, we are house divided on ANGA. But that, my friends, family and citizens, can no longer be. We face far too many challenges, and we have much work to do. And ultimately, we have a bright future that cannot become tethered to the shores of mistrust and misinformation. This agreement is a fantastic moment to make a real change. Just like the other agreements that we've been involved in, like the Anishinaabeg education system, our land claim, our election code, matrimonial real property, the repatriation of our ancestors, and our list goes on. I would say that you and I have a common story. In many ways, a common struggle of divisions overcome and hope renewed. We must always stand together, even in times of challenge. That has always been the key to our success. I remember a time not long ago, on a historic moment on June 22nd, 2010, when Whitefish River turned the tide on the HST. One example of our strength in action. It's our ability to find common ground that will bring us closer together and give way to a much brighter future. It's our working to end the history of mistrust and misinformation and align ourselves with facts and with what we want to create. After all, this is our place, a place of visions and dreams. We welcome the enthusiasm and the interest in the Anishinaabeg Nation Governance Agreement. But I would say we have a responsibility to meet the needs of our dynamic and growing community. The Chief and Council are very deeply aware of what those challenges look like. We have faced many decades of chronic underfunding for services. But I would say today, we can begin to change that trajectory and chart our own course in the area of language and culture, citizenship, elections, and band support funding. We have now concluded the negotiations, and we have had information sessions on the agreement during our first vote. Now with the second vote, we are ready to make history. Together, let's strive to make the next step towards building that brighter future together. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Chief. Now for our next speaker, Martin Bayer. You have the floor.
Okay, Sandy, if you could call up the PowerPoint there.
Does everybody see it? Can everybody see that?
No, our agenda is still up there, Sandy.
Okay, hang on. Right. Okay. You know, we practiced this too, and I still didn't get it right. All right, there we are. Now can you see it?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, Miigwech, Sandy, I'll just prompt you when it's time to advance to the next slide. So anyway, I want to say Miigwech for Leslie for the opening prayer, and Miigwech Ngima for your opening remarks, and Miigwech Skoka for your introduction, and Sandy, thank you for your technical support. So what I've done is I've presented a brief presentation which just talks about what the governance agreement is about, what the second vote is about, and so with that introduction, I'll get right into the presentation, and if you could advance the next slide, Sandy, that'd be great. Okay, Miigwech. So really, so what's this agreement about? Well, Ngima spoke about the fact, he went back in our history in terms of when these negotiations started, and it's been the result of over 20 years of negotiations with Canada that in the end would recognize your inherent right to pass your own laws in the areas of elections. And I was part of your process to get out of the Indian Act election and come up with your own custom election code. And you did a number of good things in that code. You extended your term to 4 years. You instituted an appeal body. You required the consent of people running for office. And I remember some of the discussions that were going on during the course of our meetings. And at the time, there was this apprehension about calling, your election a code or a law. And in the end, you decided to stick with language that the department would be more familiar with, which is a code. Well, once this agreement is passed, then you could rename your custom election code and call it a custom election law, because this agreement would now recognize that code as a law under this agreement. So that's one thing that the agreement's about, is it would allow you to convert your existing custom election code into a custom election law as recognized under this agreement. Our communities struggle a lot with losing people that could speak the language. We're not, bringing back the use of our language fast enough. I know we're doing stuff in our schools to encourage the use of language and Stabemwin in our schools and to teach our kids, but we've got to do more. And part of the challenge has been to, how do you do more with the limited resources we have? And so under this agreement, there'll be more fiscal resources available to put into language classes, for instance, for everybody, not just at the school, but even, band office staff, for instance. We started off tonight's meeting with a prayer to our Creator. This agreement will allow us to do more of that, whether it's at council meetings or community meetings like the one we're having tonight. And so that's another area of lawmaking power that's recognized under this agreement, is the power to put in place election language laws and culture laws as well. You know, under as long as we continue to define our membership under the Federal Indian Act, it just means that over time our who our Anishinaabe people are under that act are going to disappear. It's just a matter of time. That's what that act is designed to do. Whereas if we, under this agreement, pass an Ibn-Dagzijik law or citizenship law, we can start to, you know, use that law to help convince INAC that when they're recognizing who our people are, they should really look to how we define who our people are in our Ibn-Dagzijik law. And so we'll have an opportunity to engage in that discussion with INAC in the years ahead. And then, as the Gimma explained, you know, some of the powers that are in the area of management and operation of our government. It's the obvious one is a Financial Administration Act. That's important because before we had this power recognized, we were subject to the federal government's laws on financial management, and it wasn't very long ago that under that financial management law, we were required to report on things like honorariums received by members of council, travel expenditures, salary if applicable. And so we were required to post that on our website, and if we didn't, we would have funding pulled back by the government for failing to comply with that. So under this agreement, that'll be all gone, and it'll be replaced by your own financial management or administration law that you come up with. So that's what this agreement is about in terms of the laws that it recognizes: elections, language and culture, Ibn-Dagzijik or citizenship, and management and operation of your government. So if you could advance to the next slide, Sandy. So continuing with what's the agreement about, there's something something unique in the agreement that excuse me, is unique to this table. The agreement would provide for the establishment of an intergovernmental forum for our member First Nations to sit down with Canada, and I say Canada because that's not sitting down with, you know, Indigenous Services Canada or their other department, but it's with the government of Canada as a whole, meeting regularly to raise, you know, the concerns that you might have. Because I've just talked about those 4 lawmaking powers, and that's just the beginning. I mean, we have other needs as well in our communities. We always have housing shortages. Our schools need more funding. We need more funding for our roads and to run our fire departments. So these are things that we could bring up in that intergovernmental forum, and you know, the more First Nations that are part of that, the more strength we would have. So we've got that in the agreement that provides for that establishment of an intergovernmental forum that's available for our First Nations leadership to meet with Canada on a government-to-government basis. As well, and this is really important because right now we don't get enough funding for governance activities. We have to pull from other pots to get funding to run things like, you know, language classes, for instance, and to find the money to have meetings. Well, this would give us much more funding for governance activities than what you get right now. The minimum that, you know, we would get under this is 1.7 million a year, and I think, you know, Lisa might have more accurate figures in her presentation, but that as compared to, I think, what you get now, which is about 277,000 a year. So this would give us much more governance related, or much more funding for governance related activities. And in addition, if we don't spend all the money on the additional money that you'll be getting on governance activities, then it doesn't have to be given back to the government. Any surplus funding can be kept, and you could put it into where you need it. And so that's a good thing as well. And with this additional funding, it can help you to build programs that can encourage and strengthen the use of Anishinaabe and Win language in our communities, and in our schools and in our places of work, and to use more of our culture in the way that we govern ourselves. So if you could advance the next slide, Sandy, please. So it'll help us build stronger communities by having better governing systems. So for example, when you made the move to get out of the Indian Act way of electing your leadership and move to a 4-year term, that's something that's going to really pay dividends in the long run. You're going to have much more time to work together as a council and as a community to get things done, to build infrastructure in your community. The land claim agreement that's recently ratified was many years in the works, and it could not have been accomplished in the limited 2-year term that was available under the Indian Act for term of office for chief and councils. So that's an example of a really important move that you made to come up with your own custom election code and provide for a longer term of office and moving to a 4-year term. So it gives you much more time to get some of these important projects completed. But there's other things that make a difference as well. I mean, down the road, we'll need to look at our appeal and redress mechanisms and how we resolve disputes in our communities. And this agreement helps to start that process. And that's an important factor as well, and something that'll help build stronger communities. And really, at the end of the day, what this is really about is changing the way we govern ourselves so it'll produce better outcomes for our people and mean better living conditions for people in the long run. That's really what all those words are about at the end of the day. And so that's really what this agreement is about. And those, the recognition of the lawmaking powers in those 4 areas are important steps along that journey. And having an intergovernmental forum is an important forum that will be available for our leadership to meet with the government of Canada to talk about these kinds of issues that we have and challenges that we have in our communities. So Sandy, if you could advance the next slide, please. So why are we having this second vote? Because we voted, for once already, and it's because under the agreement we had to reach a voting threshold where a minimum of 25% plus one of the eligible voters in the community took part in that vote and voted yes, and those who voted yes represented a majority of those who voted. And so we just fell short of that, and so that's why we have to have this second vote coming up next month. So if you could advance the next slide, Sandy. Maybe just back up one. Yes. So, oh, okay. So under this second vote, it's going to be different. So we only need a simple majority of those who voted to vote in favor of the agreement. In fact, there's not even any minimum number of eligible voters that have to take part in the vote. So if 100 people show up to the vote and 51 vote in favor, then it's done. The threshold is off the table. The agreement's not changed. It's still same agreement that voters will be voting on as before. And so nothing has changed as far as that goes. The way you vote is the same. You can vote in the same way, in person or by mail-in ballot or by online electronically. So those are all the same as the last vote. Now, sometimes questions come up about, will this agreement affect our treaty rights? Will it affect our Aboriginal rights? And we've included language in the agreement to make sure that this agreement will not affect your treaty rights in any way, including, rights that you have under the Robinson-Huron Treaty and other treaties, for example. And it won't also, the same kind of language appears to protect Aboriginal rights. So we've included language in the agreement to make sure that it doesn't affect, Aboriginal treaty rights in any way, including rights under the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850 and other treaties. And so that was important that we included language in there to that effect, because it was something that our chiefs raised with us, and we wanted to make sure those protections were in there. So that's good that it is in there. We could advance to the next slide there, Sandy. Now as well, this question comes up of, well, what about our inherent rights? What about rights that we have that didn't come from anyone else? We've always had them, and that's why we call them inherent rights. And the agreement doesn't affect our inherent rights either. In fact, this agreement would confirm that we have the inherent right to pass the laws that are recognized in this agreement. And so that's an important part of this agreement, to make sure that we're really exercising our inherent right in these 4 areas, and Canada agrees with that, which is why we have them set out in this agreement. So that's important as well. Now, questions come up from time to time about how does this affect or sync up with the UN, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and it's right in line with the adoption of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and Canada became party to that agreement within the last few years after holding out for a bit, but now they're signed on and aboard, and so this syncs up nicely with what the declaration provisions say in UNDRIP. And if you could advance to the next slide there, Sandy, I'll review a couple of them. So certainly there's Article 3, and it confirms that Indigenous peoples have the right to self-determination, and on account of that right, they freely determine their own political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. And Article 4 furthers that and strengthens that, and says that in exercising their right to self-determination, we have the right to autonomy or self-government in matters relating to our internal and local affairs, as well as ways and means for financing our autonomous functions. And I didn't put it on there, but also Article 27 also provides that member states like Canada recognize that we have our own Indigenous laws, and the member states of the United Nations are bound to recognize them. So that's Article 27. And then the last slide just talks about that there is a constitution that Whitefish River First Nation has now. It was designed and developed for your ratification of the education agreement. And so once the agreement is passed, you'll have plenty of time to amend the Constitution to provide for the exercise of the powers that are recognized under this agreement. And that's going to be that'll be sometime down the road, because there's an effective date of I think 2021 or 2022. It's whatever you decide, and then you decide on which set of those laws you want to tackle first. And so there's enough time to amend that Constitution so that it fits with the agreement. And so that's the presentation that I wanted to cover tonight, and I'll turn it back to Skokwa.
Oh, thank you, Martin. That was very informative. Thank you for joining us tonight. I really appreciate that. I'd like to give the mic over to Lisa. On you, Lisa.
On there. Oh, there we go. Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Chief Shiny Turtle and Sandy and Muskoka, and thank you for the opening prayer. That was really beautiful. I'm just going to go over quickly some of the points of the Nishnabek Nation Governance Agreement, and Martin's touched on a few of those, but we'll go over everything, and then at the end, if you have any questions, I'll be happy, and so will Martin and Pat to answer those questions. So I'm going to be talking about the Nishnabek Nation Governance Agreement. Next. So as Martin pointed out, in this agreement, when we talk about self-government agreement, what we are talking about in this is exactly what Martin said. The only thing that's part of this agreement is, which is a sectorial agreement, is the language and culture, citizenship, leadership selection, and operations and management. Everything else that remains under the Indian Act remains in your band office. What we are talking about in this agreement are these 4 areas, these 4 lawmaking areas. Next. So the first area is that I want to talk about is the language and culture laws. So in this agreement, it recognizes the First Nations authority to pass language and culture laws, and to help the First Nation maintain our rightful use of the Anishinaabe traditional ways. So something that we want, with these laws, we're saying we've never given up our right to make our own laws, to govern ourselves, and this is just a step to ensure that one of these laws, that our language and culture is preserved. We want to make sure that we bring back and maintain and sustain our language. And Martin talked about this, that we can provide, under this agreement, there will be additional funding so that we can make sure that Anishinaabe is taught, not just to our kids in our school, to our adults. We can make a plan that there'll be a long-term plan to ensure that Anishinaabe is part of and being the first language of your community. That includes making signs. There'll be funding. You can make your signs so that people can start seeing the language on the roads, on your buildings. You can have the long-term plan that staff will, in 15, 20 years, that will be the first language. And this law also supports the Anishinaabe education system, education law, because that's what's giving the strength. This will help support and give strength to the education law in making sure that our language is taught in our schools and in the province, and that our practices, our culture is practiced and taught. So it gives strength all the way around. It supports the education, it supports the governance, it supports who we are as Anishinaabe people. The citizenship law, the agreement gives us the authority, and Canada recognizes our authority to do this, is to determine who our citizens are. Now, to be very clear, we're not talking about status. Canada wouldn't give up status. They will still maintain who status Indians are. But status is a definition of Canada. We know who we are as Anishinaabe people. We don't need status. We don't need a number, whether it's our band number or Bill C-31 or whatever new legislation has come out. We know who our people are. In some of our communities, there's people that don't even have status, or it ends at a certain, great-great-grandchild, but there are citizens. They're Anishinaabe citizens. They're your citizens. So we will decide who our citizens are. But again, just to be clear, that doesn't include status. But that's not to say that that's not something we're going to look at down the future. We need to build our citizenship list, not our membership list, our citizenship list, so that moving forward, when we negotiate for other areas, health, housing, all of the things that we require to live a good life in our community, we need actual numbers. Your band membership list might say 100, but your citizenship list might say 500. And moving forward, once we know who our citizens are, that's who the number you will use to negotiate, to get the funding that Canada owes us for what they've taken from us in the past. We deserve a good life, and for the price that we've paid, that's what we're entitled to. So under the citizenship law, some examples of what can be included in that is the rights, privileges, and responsibilities of being a citizen of Whitefish River. And also the cost of engaging your citizens and your citizenship. So having committees, making up the law, there's funding that will come with that. The rights and responsibilities. There might be people that are non-native in your community. You know, what are their rights and responsibilities? And I used the example, and I should let you know, my husband's sitting here. My husband is non-native, but we live in Dokis, and but he's a citizen of Dokis. He has some rights and privileges, but one for sure that he will never have in Dokis is he will never vote in our elections. He's non-native. But also in our community, you can't go into our territory and hunt and fish unless you have someone from our community with you. But my husband provides for our household, so he can get wood. You know, we can go hunting and we can harvest. So those are some of the areas that you might want to look at moving forward in your citizenship list. What are the rights and responsibilities and privileges of being a citizen of Whitefish River? And that's not just for the people that are, say, non-native or from another community. That's for all members. We should all be good law-abiding citizens and know what rights and privileges and responsibilities we have to our community. So as I understand it right now, Whitefish River has a membership code, but basically that's the arm of Indian Affairs. And that the Indian Act continues to interfere, and which continues to cause division amongst our people, amongst your people. It's happening right across the Anishinaabeg Nation. Bill C-31, you know, all of these different labels that they put on us. And that's all part of the colonization, and it was their way to extinguish us. We will never go away. We will always be Anishinaabe, and we will always decide who our people are in our hearts because we know who we are. Next. So the election law. Again, this law recognizes your inherent right to develop your own laws. As Martin mentioned, Whitefish River right now went through a process, and we actually use Whitefish River when we talk about the process that you used to develop your custom election code, to involve your people, to do surveys, to have meetings, to have your ratification vote on it. There was input from all of your citizens. Now, so you've already done the work. Now you can decide that you want to just take your custom election code and turn it into a law. You've done the work. You get the funding regardless if you know what you've done or what you're going to do. Now, some of the things that might be that are in your custom election code is your length of your term. How many people can be on council? You can decide what the qualifications of your chief and council. Now, you have this in your code, make it your law. And then it'll be up to you as citizens, as Whitefish River, how you want to, if you want to amend your law, it'll go back to your citizens for that. It will not go back to INAC. So I keep saying custom election code. It is Whitefish River's election code, but that code word is still INAC. It had to go to INAC for final approval. Under this agreement, there will be no more of that. It'll go to the people for final approval. INAC will not have a say in your elections. You won't report your results to elections. Martin talked about appeals and redress. If there's any appeals of your election, it'll be done at your First Nation level or an appeals process that's set up. It could be at the First Nation level or it could be at the Anishinaabe Nation level. But in the end, it is your First Nations law. And that's important. Accountability is back to your citizens, to Whitefish River citizens. Next. The operations and management and operations law. It recognizes the authority to for the First Nations to make its own financial management act, for example. And that under this law, you make the laws that set out how you want your finances to be set out. And no other government, not the Anishinaabe Nation, not Canada, not Ontario, nobody will have a say into how your financial management act or law is developed or run. Now, Martin used the examples of previously the Canada imposed a law that said we had to report honorariums and travel expenses and salaries of chief and councils, and it had to be posted on to the website so that it could be reported to the Canadian citizens. Well, that shouldn't be, but it should be reported to your own citizens. And in your Financial Management Act, you can have in there that you want you know, a budget meeting at the beginning of the year, you know, before the budget is set, so that First Nation, your citizens know exactly what's going into your yearly budget, and then have an audit report at the end of the year so that you know how much was spent, and so that you can keep an eye on that. Right now, audits are done, and that is a requirement of INAC. And yes, they are presented to First Nations, to the First Nation citizens, whether it's in August or September. But the main focus of that is because it's a requirement of INAC so that we get our funding. We want to, it shouldn't be that way. The accountability and the transparency has to be to the First Nation citizens. And under your own Financial Management Act, your own Administration Act, that's what it'll be. The accountability will be to the citizens. So that's the important thing. There's everything will be back to the citizens, and INAC is out of the way. So there are going to be two levels of government. There will be the Anishinaabe Nation government, and there will be the First Nation government. The First Nation government is paramount. First Nations are up here. The Anishinaabe Nation government is here. The First Nations will decide what laws the Anishinaabe Nation government is going to pass. The Anishinaabe Nation is not going to tell the First Nations what to do. The First Nation, the Anishinaabe Nation government will be made up of a representative from each First Nation that ratifies this agreement. So the Anishinaabe Nation government will be made up of a representative of every First Nation that ratifies this agreement. That's who the Anishinaabe Nation government will be. And the Anishinaabe Nation government will have its own funding based on the number of First Nations that ratify the agreement. There is no funding that is coming from the First Nations. The First Nations will not be paying for the Anishinaabe Nation government. There was money negotiated separately for the Anishinaabe Nation, and it's based on the number of First Nations that ratify the agreement. So no money, no funding will be taken from your First Nation to operate the Anishinaabe Nation government. And the Union of Ontario Indians will not be the government. The government will be set up by the First Nations. The location will be decided by the First Nations. The size of it could be 4, 1 in each region. It could be set up in a process the way the Anishinaabe education system was put up, that there be a tender and First Nations bid on it, but it'll be decided by the First Nations that ratify this agreement, how big, where it's located, and what it does. So First Nation governments are paramount. There will be there is a new fiscal framework that comes with this agreement. So the funding that comes with this agreement to operate and that to set up our own governments under this agreement. There's the fiscal arrangement that's in a separate agreement that comes with this agreement. And how this formula was developed, the funding formula was mostly based on comparable full-time equivalents in Ontario, so and Canada for programs and services. So, for example, in Ontario, what Ontario pays for programs and services for full-time staff, etc., is what First Nations will get. So it's based on the full-time equivalents for staff and programs and services. So, and when I say mostly, that's the majority of the formula. And there was also the remoteness of First Nations were taken into account to to formulate the amount that First Nations would get. So to be clear, the Anishinaabe Nation Governance Agreement is a permanent agreement. That will not change. The only way that agreement can change is if all the parties, the First Nation, the Anishinaabe Nation, and Canada agree to make changes. No individual group, Canada, the First Nation, or the Anishinaabe Nation cannot make changes. It has to be done together. It has to be negotiated together. The fiscal arrangements are negotiated every 5 years, and they're negotiated to make sure that the First Nations get whatever funding is available. Should new funding come available after 5 years, we want to make sure that we get the new funding that's out there. We will always demand more funding, always, and that's part of the negotiations that will take place with the fiscal arrangements in the negotiations every 5 years. So the examples that we're going to use in the funding that comes with this agreement, it's to help offset the cost that's related to the operations of the band office, to running your elections, and to developing citizenship laws. All of that funding is going to be there to do all of these things that the First Nation will take over. So also in the new fiscal framework, own source revenue will not be applied. And that was negotiated to be in a moratorium under which own source revenue can only be applied if First Nations agreed. Now, Martin and Jide did the negotiations on this. They stuck to their guns because the chiefs, the Anishinaabe chiefs, said they do not want OSR, and they stood firm on that. So Martin and Jide negotiated this. And the First Nations right across Canada took a stand as well. So INAC put it in a moratorium, but Martin and Jide made sure that the wording was in the agreement, that it had to be negotiated in. So there is no way that OSR will apply. Canada will always want to negotiate OSR, but it has to be negotiated. And from what I've seen over the years that I've worked at the Anishinaabe Nation level, no First Nation wants OSR, so it won't apply. So regarding First Nations funding, proposed funding, specifically regarding First Nations, Whitefish River First Nation, the fiscal offer that will replace your band support funding and your governance-related band employee benefits, which currently sit, and this was in 2018-19, at $277,000. There will be an increase to $2,114,000 annually. So that represents a 760% increase. So what you see here is $2 million up from $277,000, and that's band support funding. That pays for your rental, your paper, your employees, your chief and counsel, travel, your secretary, all of these things. And most First Nations go in debt in band support funding. There is not enough money to run your band office. So First Nations are doing own source revenue because they're having to use your funds to offset the shortcomings of what's in band support funding. This increase will take place in year 1 and will happen. Another $2 million would come in year 2 with an increase in inflation. And in year 3, you'll get another 2 million. Year 4, you'll get another 2 million. So in 5 years, you're looking at $10.5 million plus inflation. So that's what Whitefish River will see in 5 years. Now, with this funding, it doesn't have to be returned. It's your funding. You decide how your funding is going to be used. If in the first year you use 700,000, that money is there for Whitefish River to use on whatever Whitefish priorities are. Could be education, could be housing, could be roads, whatever your plans are in your community, that's where that funding can go. No one is going to tell Whitefish River how to use this money. The reporting that comes back will go through the Anishinaabeg Nation, and Canada will, and the Anishinaabeg Nation will consolidate all the reporting, and it'll be reported back to Canada in one report. I also want to say that how that funding comes to your First Nation through this agreement will be through the Anishinaabeg Nation. Canada will send the money to the Anishinaabeg Nation government, and the Anishinaabeg Nation government is a flow-through. What you see on this paper, if we were to ratify this last year to $2,114,000 is what Whitefish River will get. No money is coming off of what Whitefish River will get. What's negotiated for Whitefish River is what Whitefish River will get. Now, this all depends if of course you ratify this agreement. And then the last slide is that the ratification vote will take place in November, and a vote for the governance agreement is a vote for the inherent right of each Anishinaabeg Nation First Nation citizen. So it's up to the First Nations to decide if this is what they want for your community. Thank you. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Lisa. I'd like to turn the mic over to former Grand Chief and Champion Pat Madavi. Patrick.
Good evening, everyone. And miigwech to Marion for the opening, and Gima for your remarks, and for the presenters. I want to just talk some very simple language here. Like, there's lots of political jargon here about what governance really means, but I fashioned it down to just the development of your community, the vision. They say Whitefish River is a place of vision and dreams. So what is the vision of Whitefish River in its journey of its community development going down the road? That's what this is all about in plain, simple language. This journey, there's been lots of steps on this journey. If you look at other countries of the world, some of them have taken thousands of years to, get the freedom to take a look at how they want to design, their journey from their perspective, from their lens as an Anishinaabe from Whitefish River. And, our people are very resilient people. We haven't been around for thousands and thousands of years, as we say, since time immemorial, because, we are resilient. That's why we're still around. But also, the fact is that our people are very intelligent, and sometimes we forget that. And we have a tendency to rely on outside, non-native people or consultants to say, what is best for our people. And, our people really know, what's best for them. That's why we've been around for so many years. These agreements, they're not new. These types of things were being signed by First Nations up in the Yukon, out in BC, and different other parts of Canada many years ago. And guess what? The sky hasn't fallen. They've had stability in those communities. And, we've had lots of naysayers, armchair quarterbacks, criticize what's been going on here. But, the majority of them are not even from a First Nation. A lot of them are not even from Ontario. A lot of them have never been living in a community, First Nation community. Some of those people have never been on a band council, and yet they seem to know what's best for us. And I go back to what I said earlier. Our people are very intelligent in our community, and they know what's best for us. The action that's required is for our people to stand together and plot their journey and develop their vision of what they want. And that's done by, good dialogue amongst us. Now, I think one of the things that's also made us strong and resilient and kept us, our nations intact all these years is that, we've been communal in nature. If you look at what goes on in other jurisdictions about individual rights, and the challenges that come along with individual rights, that's where you really get lots of disunity. You look at what's going on with our friends down below in the United States right now, the division that's going on. You know, it's really sad to see that. You know, when we talk about the 4 areas, this is not an accident that these 4 areas are being the first areas that we're looking at under this agreement. The chiefs have looked at this thing for over 25, close to 25 years now, and it's like building a house. You know, Gima Shining Turtle, you know, being an engineer, knows that in order to build a house, you have to have a stable foundation. And these 4 areas that's being looked at under this agreement, they're like the 4 pillars of that foundation on which you start to build your house. And I want to say, you know, nobody should panic that anything is going to happen overnight, or even in a year for that matter. That time frame of how you implement these areas is up to your people through your dialogue in your community. You know, some of these things may take 5 years, some of them may 10 years, some may take even longer. And, you know, you take elections, for example. You know, you folks have done a lot of great work already there with your electoral reform in White Fish River. You know, that's an area, you know, you may not have to bother with very much, or maybe just tweak it a little bit, you know, as you see fit down the road somewhere. So the dollars that would have been allocated to looking at a whole big exercise of going through electoral reform, those dollars can be reallocated to another priority area in the community. When it comes to language and culture, you know, as I listen to Marion, you know, say miigwech to the Creator for so many things, and talk about, you know, helping our people that are sick in hospitals, the young people, all these things. You know, the language is so beautiful. Our language is so descriptive. The English language doesn't even come close to doing justice. And it goes to the heart of who we are as Anishinaabe, you know, our identity of who we are. I was at the constitutional talks in the early 80s when Pierre Trudeau was saying to First Nations across Canada, you don't even practice your languages and cultures anymore. English and French are the dominant cultures in Canada today. And, you know, there's some 52 distinct nations in Canada that were here long before these Johnny-come-lately people that claim to be the founding nations of Canada. And, you know, they were told unequivocally that we were the First Nations in this land. That's where that term First Nations came from. You know, that we were the First Nations here in this land. And, you know, so it's so important, you know, that if we don't maintain that distinction of who we are in our identity as Anishinaabe, we'll fall into the trap that the government has set all along here, is to try to assimilate us. They've tried many occasions to do this, you know, with the 69 white paper, with just to control, you know, such as the residential schools, you know, take the Indian out of the child, as what they said. There's so many examples of where they've tried to change us into something we're not. You know, even the Governance Act that they tried to implement with during the Robert Nault years in the early 90s was a municipalization type of system of government that was nowhere anything resembling what our First Nations leadership wanted to do. So, you know, one of the areas that is really important here in this process is the whole Ibeng Daljajik, those that belong, our citizens. The present Indian Act registration system is outright genocide. And the chief and I were talking earlier today about, there was a demographic study done by the Ogimawatch Tribal Council down near Aurelia area, Rama area, that did a forecast of, you know, with the labeling and the designations of, you know, you're a C31 or a 61B or 61C, all these labels are just going to lead to the fact that there will be no communities left with any First Nations citizens in their communities. We already have a community, Scugog First Nation near Port Perry, that's in that situation. So we have to turn that around, and that's only going to be by us determining who our citizens are. We know who our families are. And most demographic nations of the world use a one-parent rule, lineage in the family. We know our families, you know, and we're saying, you know, we should be determining our own citizens. And I use the word citizens, like Lisa was referring to, is a internationally recognized terminology. We don't want to try to use membership. You can be a member of the Kiwanis Club or a member of the Knights of Columbus, but you're a citizen of your nation. And that's what makes it so strong. And that's what the government doesn't want us to talk about. They don't want us to talk about the fact that we're still citizens of our nation. So that's why it's so important that we determine who our own citizens are. You know, they've tried to eliminate us. That was, going right back to the very first days of newcomers coming to this territory. They've been trying to eliminate us, but guess what? We're still here, and if anything, with the young people we have in our communities, we're getting stronger. You know, this management and operations. You know, Gima mentioned, you know, this issue of trust in our communities, you know, today about trust of chiefs and councils. It's a real toxic atmosphere in all of our communities. And that's because we're not operating our own system of governance. We're operating, you know, under the thumb of, you know, the great white father there in Ottawa. You talk about child abuse. You know, this is unreal what these guys, the hoops that you have to jump through, you know, to follow the INAC guidelines. So what happens is, you know, people get upset and they get mad at chiefs and councils, you know, and I'll use a quick example. You know, when I was chief of my community, we had 59 families on our waiting list for housing. We prioritized that down to 10 to try to get a manageable number. And we were allocated 3 houses from Indian Affairs. So guess what? We made 3 families happy. We made 7 families very unhappy. And who did they get mad at? They got mad at the chief and council instead of the fact that the federal government was under-resourcing us in the first place. And you can take that into every decision that a chief and council makes, trying to do a $1,000 job working with only $200 or $100. So this new agreement is going to give us that kind of you know, funding stability, and Lisa gave you the numbers. I can caution you that with this COVID and the major deficit that the federal government is in, money is not going to get tossed around very easily over the next probably 10 years or longer. Yeah, there's going to be no programs and services of any increases in those things, you know, laid out by any level of government for quite a period of time till they recover from the deficits that are being incurred by this COVID thing. But this agreement allows for constant stability of funding, and in a much higher level of funding, you know, that's more realistic to meeting the needs of the communities. You know, there's lots of protections in this thing, you know, and you know, I looked at the references to the United Nations. Those really protect us, as does the Canadian Constitution. So I mentioned that you have the time to take the time to implement it based on your vision and your pace and time. But one other important thing, and I want to just make 2 more points. This will be the last time that the government will be setting the rules, you know, such as these election thresholds, or, you know, setting the guidelines of how things will be done. We won't have to go back to them anymore, you know, when because it'll be your First Nation, Whitefish River, that'll set the rules. It'll be your First Nation that gives the approval to anything that you guys, you know, set out in your vision as Whitefish River. The last thing, Lisa mentioned this a little bit about creating an Anishinaabe Nation government. It may not even be called that. It's a central entity that the chiefs and councils of each community that ratifies this agreement will take a look at, you know, what needs to be handed over to maybe a central body for economies of scale. You know, or if it makes more common sense, you know, to do things at one office. It might be something like a registry, you know, of our citizenship. You know, it's done in one central location. Advocacy is probably so important here. You know, when we fight these battles, it's hard to fight a battle as one First Nation. When you have a collectivity of communities working together to fight the government, whether it's on any issue of the day or when we go to renew these negotiations. And the other part is, you know, capacity. You know, when a First Nation, you know, is building its capacity, you know, for an interim period of time, you know, this central entity may take on some of those responsibilities until that type of capacity can be built in your own community, and then you take that back. There's an ebb and flow to what you delegate to that central entity. So, you know, I guess being around the political tables for close to 47 years now, you know, I've seen this journey that we've been on. And I can tell you, you know, we've made some great strides, but you can't make any kind of advancement unless you're prepared to take that first step. A lot of people think that you know, there's a safety and comfort in the Indian Act and the status quo. Well, the status quo is making our community stay under-resourced, under-serviced, and not moving forward. You know, there's lots of vision and dreams in all of our communities. So let's take this journey, you know, Whitefish River, because you guys have got those vision and dreams, and you know what you do. You do. I've seen such advancements in your community over the years. You know, that's how things get done. You don't need some outside jurisdiction trying to tell you how to do it, because they don't know how to do it. Anyway, thank you very much.
Powerful words. Chimigwech, Patrick. I think we can turn it over to a period of questions if anybody has any questions from our audience. Going once, going twice. All right. Well,
Will these, hello?
sorry, go ahead.
Will this PowerPoint presentation and the presentations be available to the community members to view? Because there's
Yes, I
not
think we
many
have
on
them.
this at this point.
I understand. Yeah, I think we have it recorded, right, Sandy? And I think we will be posting it either to our webpage or
Will there be a
to.
time,
Sorry, go ahead.
will there be a time for them to ask questions as well?
Yes, we are hosting another. We're hosting another conference session such as this one on the 28th of October around the same time, 6 p.m. So if they do have more questions that we don't answer either now or in the near future, they can come to the information session on the 28th and ask the questions. Sandy?
I was just going to say, yeah, that's what we're going to do. We're going to take questions up until the 28th and try to answer them all on the 28th. And the PowerPoint presentations will be made available on the website, probably not tomorrow though. And the video as well.
In the near future, we'll have them on the website.
So the second presentation, is it going to be a repeat of this presentation?
I think we were thinking on the 28th, the next presentation, we were gonna possibly just do a Q&A and answering questions to the public and addressing the public's questions.
We're trying to be more responsive to what the community wants to know.
Right.
Is it clear where people can send in their, because this is a lot of information to process, but they're actually really good presentations, and thank you, Patrick. Sometimes you just got to tell it like it is as opposed to try to fancy it up too much. So that like you can actually prepare like a Q&A, like commonly asked questions that people are asking, because it's again a lot to process. People might want to look at the PowerPoints again. And then have and formulate questions like, I don't know, later tonight or tomorrow or something like that. Like do you have a process for how that could work?
Muskoka will be the main contact, and we'll put that information out so that people can send him questions, and then we can work on those responses, or whether or not we need to do a whole presentation, depending on the type of questions that we receive. I think is what we're going with.
Right. I can drop my email into our chat right now. If anybody has questions that they want answered in the near future, you guys can direct them to either me or Sandy's email.
All right, thank you.
At
Any
the
other
next,
questions?
sorry, Ms.
Sorry, go
Olga.
ahead.
At the
No, go ahead.
next meeting, is Patrick, Martin, and Lisa going to be available as well to answer any technical questions? Pat says thumbs up.
Mhm.
Thumbs up for Lisa. Thumbs up for Martin. Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to mention, if I could, because I know there was some questions about the second vote and things and the numbers. So I don't know if you want to address that, or if you want to put that out in your own information, Muskoka, about
Right.
because we have like the ratification numbers for Whitefish River. There was more yeses than nos in the first vote. And that's
Yeah.
why that's why under the agreement, we are able to move forward, and your community has taken that step to do that. So in the first round, which was a very high threshold, your community was only short by 24 yes votes, but there was 161 yes votes and 128 no votes. So there was more yes votes than no votes to move forward with this process.
Yes.
Just like, was pointed out, again, sort of telling it like it is. The arbitrary thresholds that Indian Affairs sets, go contrary to, the traditional voting patterns of each of these, or of our First Nations. Whitefish River always, like all communities, do best practices to try and get a hold of all of your citizens. And there's a voting pattern that happens all the time. That should be the guideline, of what is decided in your community. So as I said in my remarks there, this will be the last time that Indian Affairs will set those rules. You folks in Whitefish River need to set those guidelines so that decision can be made along what you think is right for your community. There's, I know for a fact, all of our communities, we have people from my First Nation that are living out in Alberta that wouldn't even know how to get to my community unless they had a GPS. They've never been here for the 67 years that I've been on planet Earth. We don't even know who they are. We know their name is on our list, but they're not going to come and vote. We try to get a hold of them, they don't vote. So we have a traditional block of folks that vote every time from on and off reserve. That's what should be determining the decision making, not some arbitrary threshold by provincial and federal governments that don't even meet, they meet minimal thresholds. They've had governments in power that have got less than 30% of the votes in the country, and they're running the government. So they're dictating arbitrary thresholds that don't make any sense.
Right now, this threshold that we didn't meet last vote, it defaulted to no, but we had more yeses than no's. I think this time around, we just asked that everybody go and voice their opinion and vote on voting day.
Actually, Ms. Coca, I'm gonna, it didn't default to no.
Right.
It just, we didn't meet the threshold of the number of people required to come out and vote. So the vote still, like the yes votes still outweighed the no votes. We just didn't have, under INAC's rules, we didn't have enough to ratify the agreement. Now, as was negotiated in the agreement, there is a second round of votes, and your First Nation has chosen to take that next step.
Great. Any more questions? Okay, if there's no more questions, Chief Shining Turtle, would you like to have any final words on our meeting?
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah, I would just say that this is another good start. Being in this position for 18 years, you see a lot of the true challenges that we run up against. These 4 areas are critical to us taking the next step, and it's just part of a puzzle. It's just part of a piece that I think will help pave the way for the future. We've done some good things in the community. We have a long way to go, particularly in the healing of the community. So I think these first steps are important. Looking back at where we've come from, this is worth ratifying. This is really worth ratifying. And I always think that we look forward to the younger people. I look at the old band hall in our community. I had the privilege of working out of that office for the last few years, but they were the old band halls that were built by Indian Affairs. Me and Pat were talking about them. They built one in West Bay, they built one in Sucker Creek, they built one in Wiki, they built one in what was known as Birch Island Indian Reserve back then. We outgrew that. So the new leaders that are coming, the young people that are coming, get this beautiful new facility. And so the opportunity to grow our community in that way is really important. So there's a generation now, remember the old band hall? The newer generations will have a better journey in terms of planning for the future. That's important. The work we did on elections, a lot of magnificent work went into that document by the community. And we've taken that step when people thought we couldn't do it. Again, the overcoming, I think, our own hurdles and our own misinformation and mistrust. And that just comes from colonization. And I think when we put that all away, we know language and culture is really important to us. Pat's right, the deficit now for the federal government is in the order of 150 billion plus. We know this is going into March of next year. That's the end of the fiscal year. We're probably going to be well over 200 billion in debt. The likelihood of us having another opportunity with a government, whether liberal, conservative, or NDP or Greens, may not happen for some time. So we have to, this is an important moment in our history, a real important moment. And it's one that shouldn't be brought in by difference. It should be, look, this is something that we're doing for the future. You think about the kids that are in kindergarten now at our Shawanasway School in grade 1 and grade 2 and 3, 4, 5, 6, paving that better future. At one time, we didn't have paved roads in Birch Island. Now we have paved roads, one little step forward. But those future steps that we take today really will help those young people, move our community along. And that's ultimately what we want to see. And then Pat's really right. At the end of the day, if you set aside all this stuff, all we're trying to do is develop the community. Develop in a way that fits for us. And we've done some good things in the community. We have a lot of other good things that we want to do. And we need a sensible resource, a stabilized resource to be able to do that. I'll tell you, with the band support, we asked at council the other night, it's up slightly from the 277, but band support funding is historically at every community, not just Whitefish River, you name all the communities, band support funding is red. It's in a deficit, and it shows up in our audits every year. We take those questions from the community. Why isn't there enough money? Because there isn't funding from the government on the band support side. This is the first time, I've been in this business since 1989. This is the first time I've seen a serious attempt to address the band support funding shortfalls. So this is really worthy of consideration. Thank you very much to all the presenters, and I think there's 11 or 12 people that came online tonight to listen to the presentation. I want to thank them for coming out and asking questions and thinking through the process. And Ms. Skokie did an excellent job. And Sandy, thank you for organizing this and turning on the screen for me. We struggled with that. And to members of council that are listening, thank you for participating in tonight's meeting.
Oh, thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Andy.
Oh, just one more thing for our guests. Names will be entered into the draw. More info on that on the next session if you attend on the 28th. All right.
Good night.
Miigwech.
Everybody.
Kamapi.
Thank you, Ms. Koga.
You're
No
welcome.
problem.
Night.